The reflection at Warner Hall. The letter arrived on a dreary Tuesday, its edges stained with what looked like tea rings. I stared at the words, sole surviving relative, and conditions of occupancy until they blurred together. Warner Hall. A place I'd only heard whispered about at family gatherings, usually after too much wine. No one had lived there since 1923, when Great Aunt Esme vanished into the woods, leaving behind only a nightgown draped over a thorn bush. I arrived at the manor as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. The key stuck in the lock, requiring a firm shove before the door creaked open. Dust motes danced in the fading light as I stepped into the foyer, my suitcase hitting the floor with a dull thud that echoed through empty rooms. That's when I felt it for the first time. The weight of unseen eyes. I told myself it was just nerves, the natural unease of being alone in an old house. But as night fell, the feeling only intensified. It took 3 days of exploring before I found the hidden room. A false panel in the library, its edges disguised by peeling wallpaper, revealed a space that smelled of metal and decay. Candles, long melted into misshapen lumps, surrounded a stone altar. The walls bore carvings, spirals and serpents that seemed to writhe if I looked at them too long. On the altar lay a journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was sharp and frantic, unmistakably Esme's. The veil thins during the equinox. I've seen her in the mirrors. She takes more each time. William tried to stop the chanting. This morning, his reflection showed only bones. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the chill that ran down my spine. That's when I noticed the mirror. It dominated the far wall, its frame tarnished black. My reflection looked pale and tired, but normal. As I turned to leave, though, something in my peripheral vision made me freeze. A shadow, massive and wrong, seemed to press against the other side of the glass. I fled the room, slamming the panel shut behind me. The dream started that night. I found myself in a grove of black trees, their branches forming unnatural arches. Women in tattered lace dresses chanted in a language that made my teeth ache. They dragged a girl to a stone basin, her face a younger version of my own. When they slit her throat, the blood formed words as it crawled up the sides. She remembers your name. I woke up tasting copper. Days passed and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Mirrors became a source of dread. I'd catch glimpses of movement just outside my field of vision, shadows that didn't quite match my own. One night, in a moment of desperate bravado, I decided to confront my fears head-on. Standing in the bathroom at midnight, candle in hand, I chanted Bloody Mary 3 times. For a heartbeat, my reflection flickered. The room behind me wasn't the bathroom anymore, but the grove from my dreams. The women stood frozen, mouths open in mid-chant. Behind them, something massive moved in the darkness. A silhouette with too many limbs, its head tilted at an impossible angle. It wasn't looking at the women. It was looking at me. I stumbled backwards, extinguishing the candle as I fell. When I managed to turn the lights on, everything was normal. But I knew what I'd seen. A week later, Mr. Hargrove, the ancient caretaker, paid a visit. He eyed the tree line nervously as he handed me a basket of withered apples. "You shouldn't be here after sundown," he warned. I pressed him for answers, plying him with whiskey until the story spilled out. Every autumn equinox, a girl from our bloodline was chosen to dance with the Thorn Lady. They'd carve symbols into her skin, lead her to the standing stones in the woods, and chant until dawn. In 1923, Esme refused. Next morning, Hargrove muttered, 7 men from the village were found dead. Their rib cages, it was like they'd blossomed outward, like roses made of bone. He left before sunset, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the ever-present feeling of being watched. That night, the low hum that had been vibrating through the walls ceased abruptly. The silence was deafening. Following the smell of decay, I found myself back in the ritual room. The mirror was gone, replaced by a gaping hole in the wall. Stone steps spiraled downward, slick with something that glistened in the beam of my flashlight. The air reeked of wet earth and rotting meat. A scream tore through the house, inhuman and bone-chilling. I ran, making it to the foyer before every mirror in the house seemed to explode. Shards hovered in the air, forming a corridor of jagged glass. In each fragment, I saw her, the Thorn Lady. Her body was a tangle of roots and antlers, her face a shifting mosaic of women's features. She reached through the glass, not towards me, but towards the staircase. The walls peeled back, floorboards splintering, as something emerged from the hole in the ritual room. It was beautiful in a terrible way. Skin like polished amber, eyes like eclipsed suns. Its smile split its face into segments, each tooth a curved blade. "Little cousin," it hissed, its voice a horrifying blend of Esme's, my mother's, and my own. "You stopped the dance, broke the chain, now we take our due." The Thorn Lady roared. Their claws met in a shower of glass and splinters. I understood then. The ritual wasn't worship, it was containment. The blood, the chanting, it was all to keep him buried. Esme hadn't run away, she'd set him free. As their battle tore the house apart, I retreated to the wine cellar. The rules became clear. Don't look directly at him, don't speak her true name. Don't let your shadow touch either of them. But the cellar door wouldn't hold forever. I could hear them on the stairs, hisses like saws on stone, clicks that seemed to reshape the air itself. There had to be a way to fix this. Esme's journal held clues, a silver dagger under the altar, a jar of black salt, and me, the last warner. The final page showed a woman standing between two trees, arms outstretched. The caption read, "The veil must be mended with willing blood." I knew what I had to do. When they broke through, I would carve the symbols into my skin. I would chant the words that bound our line to the land, and if I survived, I would spend every autumn equinox watching the mirrors. Waiting. Because the ritual doesn't end, it echoes, and next time it will be my reflection. They reached through. The Stone Whisperer. I never believed in the old stories. The ones about ancient spirits dwelling in the hills or pagan rituals that could bend reality. Those were just tales to scare children and entertain tourists. At least, that's what I thought until I found myself at the center of a mystery that would shake my understanding of the world to its core. My name is Fiona MacLeod, and I'm a historian specializing in Celtic folklore. When I received an invitation to study the stone circle at Craignadown, I jumped at the chance. The site had been closed to the public for years due to unexplained phenomena, and I was eager to separate fact from fiction. As I drove through the winding Scottish Highlands, the mist clung to the hills like a shroud. The stone circle loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette against the gray sky. Even from a distance, there was something unsettling about it. The stones seemed to lean inward, as if conspiring among themselves. I parked my car and grabbed my research kit. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something older and more primal. As I approached the circle, the wind picked up, carrying with it what sounded like whispers. I shook my head, attributing it to my overactive imagination. The stones were even more impressive up close. Weathered by centuries of wind and rain, they bore intricate carvings that had puzzled archaeologists for generations. I ran my hand over the nearest stone, feeling the grooves beneath my fingers. For a moment, I could have sworn I felt a pulse, like a heartbeat trapped in stone. I spent the next few hours taking measurements and photographs, making notes in my journal. As the day wore on, the whispers on the wind grew louder. I found myself straining to make out words, but they remained just beyond comprehension. It was nearing dusk when I noticed something white fluttering at the base of the central stone. Curious, I approached and found a small lamb, no more than a few weeks old. It lay motionless, its fleece matted with blood. My stomach churned as I realized this was no accident. The lamb had been deliberately placed here, its throat slit in a clean, practiced motion. But it was what I found clutched in the lamb's fleece that truly chilled me to the bone. A child's drawing, rendered in crayon on a crumpled piece of paper. It depicted a circle of stick figure stones, and in the center, a hooded figure. The figure's face was hidden, but something about its posture, the way it stood, was hauntingly familiar. With trembling hands, I unfolded the paper fully. There, scrawled in a childish hand, were the words, "The Stone Whisperer comes." I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. The Stone Whisperer was a figure from local legend, a mysterious entity said to commune with the ancient spirits of the land. But it was just a story, wasn't it? As if in answer, the whispers on the wind rose to a fever pitch. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside my own head. And now I could make out words. "Fiona, Fiona, you have been chosen." I ran. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, not stopping until I reached my car. I drove back to my rented cottage in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. That night, I dreamed of the stone circle. In my dream, I stood at its center, wearing a hooded cloak. The stones pulsed with an eerie blue light, and I could hear them speaking to me in a language both familiar and alien. I woke up in a cold sweat, the taste of iron in my mouth. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on my research, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The whispers followed me everywhere, in the rustle of leaves, the crackle of my fireplace, even the static of my radio. I found myself drawn back to the stone circle again and again, each time noticing new details I'd missed before. There were more sacrifices, small animals left at the base of the stones. And always, there were drawings. Children's drawings showing the hooded figure, showing me. I collected them, trying to make sense of what was happening. A week into my stay, I met Moira, an elderly woman who lived in a cottage near the circle. Her eyes lit up when I mentioned my research. "Ah, so you're the one they've been whispering about," she said, a knowing smile on her weathered face. "Who's been whispering?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. "The stones, of course," Moira replied. "They've been waiting for you, Fiona, the new stone whisperer." She told me a story then, one passed down through generations of her family. The stone circle was a gateway, she said, a place where the veil between worlds grew thin. The stone whisperer was chosen to maintain the balance, to speak for the ancient spirits and protect the land from forces that would seek to exploit its power. "But why me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Moira's eyes softened. "The stones choose who they will. It's in your blood, child, just as it was in your grandmother's." I felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath me. My grandmother had disappeared when I was just a child, last seen near this very stone circle. Was this the reason I'd been drawn to study Celtic folklore? Had some part of me always known? As the autumn equinox approached, the whispers grew more insistent. The drawings became more detailed, showing rituals performed within the circle. I found myself sleepwalking, waking up at the edge of the stone circle with no memory of how I'd gotten there. The night before the equinox, Moira came to me with a bundle wrapped in cloth. "It's time," she said solemnly. Inside the bundle was a cloak, woven with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the firelight. "What do I have to do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Listen to the stones," Moira replied. "They will guide you." As the sun set on the equinox, I stood at the center of the circle, clad in the ancient cloak. The air hummed with energy, and the whispers rose to a crescendo. I closed my eyes and let the voices wash over me. Suddenly, I could understand. The stones spoke of ancient pacts, of the delicate balance between worlds. They showed me visions of the past, of my grandmother performing the same ritual, of countless others before her. I saw the forces that threatened this balance: greed, ignorance, the relentless march of progress that disregarded the old ways. I knew what I had to do. With words that felt both foreign and innate, I began to chant. The stones pulsed with light, and I felt power coursing through me. I was the conduit, the bridge between worlds. As the ritual reached its peak, I saw them, shimmering forms of light and shadow, the ancient spirits of the land. They danced around the circle, their voices joining mine in a song as old as the hills themselves. When it was over, I fell to my knees, exhausted but exhilarated. The world felt different now, more alive, more connected. I could feel the pulse of the earth beneath me, the whispers of the wind in my bones. Moira found me there at dawn, a smile of pride on her face. "Welcome, Stone Whisperer," she said, helping me to my feet. In the days that followed, I struggled to reconcile my new role with my old life. How could I return to the academic world when I now knew the truth behind the legends? But I realized that this was why I had been chosen. My knowledge, my skepticism, these were tools to help bridge the gap between the old world and the new. I continued my research, but now with a deeper understanding. The whispers of the stones became my guide, helping me uncover secrets long buried. I wrote papers that pushed the boundaries of accepted archaeology, hinting at truths I could never fully reveal. And on certain nights, when the moon was full and the veil grew thin, I would don my cloak and return to the circle. There, I would commune with the ancient spirits, renewing the pacts that kept our world in balance. The children's drawings still appear sometimes, left at the edge of the circle, or blown to my doorstep on the wind. But now, when I see the hooded figure at the center, I no longer feel fear. I see myself as I truly am, the stone whisperer, keeper of ancient secrets, bridge between worlds. As I write this, the wind carries whispers of new challenges to come. But I am ready, for in accepting this role, I have found my true purpose. The stones chose well, and I will not let them down. The Watcher in the Woods? I never wanted to come back to Hollow Creek. The Appalachian town clung to the mountainside like a stubborn growth, its dilapidated houses and rusted trailers a testament to better days long past. But when Grandpa Joe died, leaving me his cabin and a cryptic voicemail, I had no choice. "Ellie," his voice crackled through the phone, "it's starting again. The journal, you need to read it, and whatever you do, don't trust the..." The message cut off abruptly. I arrived as autumn painted the mountains in shades of fire. The cabin stood silent, surrounded by ancient oaks whose branches seemed to reach for the structure with gnarled fingers. Inside, dust motes danced in the fading light, and the musty scent of old books filled the air. I found the journal buried in a drawer, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, a chill ran down my spine. Grandpa's neat handwriting detailed decades of strange occurrences in the woods surrounding Hollow Creek. Missing hikers, unexplained lights, and something he called the Watcher. A yellowed newspaper clipping fell from between the pages. The headline read, "Local child missing, strange symbols found." The photo showed a tree with a crude star carved into its bark. The date, October 1987. The month my mother disappeared. That night, I woke to a sound I couldn't place, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Outside the window, the woods were pitch black, but I could have sworn I saw movement in the shadows. Something large. Something watching. The next morning, I hiked up to Ravens Point, following a map I'd found in Grandpa's desk. The trail was overgrown, barely visible in places. As I pushed through a tangle of rhododendron, I stumbled into a small clearing and froze. Before me stood a circle of stones, each one taller than a man. They weren't on any official map of the area. Moss and lichen covered their surfaces, but I could make out faint carvings, spirals and stars that matched the symbol from the newspaper clipping. In the center of the circle lay a small shoe, caked with mud, but otherwise new-looking. My hand shook as I reached for my phone to take a picture. That's when I heard it, a rustling in the underbrush too large to be a deer. I spun around, heart pounding. Nothing, just the wind in the trees. But as I turned back to the stone circle, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A single child-sized footprint in the mud. It hadn't been there a moment ago. I ran all the way back to the cabin, branches whipping my face. Inside, I slammed the door and fumbled for the lock. As my breathing slowed, I noticed a piece of paper that had been slipped under the door. A child's drawing, done in red crayon. It showed a stick figure standing in a circle of tall shapes. Above it loomed a dark mass with glowing eyes. That night, the thrumming sound returned, louder this time. I huddled in bed, Grandpa's journal clutched to my chest. Around midnight, a scream echoed through the woods, high and inhuman. It was answered by another, closer to the cabin. Then another. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows. Relieved, I went to make coffee and stopped dead in my tracks. The cabin's front door stood wide open. On the porch, a line of muddy footprints led from the woods to the threshold, child-sized. Alongside them were other prints, large, three-toed marks that no animal I knew could have made. With shaking hands, I flipped through Grandpa's journal, searching for answers. Near the back, I found a page titled The Ritual. It described a ceremony to be performed at the stone circle during the autumnal equinox. To keep the Watcher at bay, Grandpa had written, "A offering must be made." The equinox was 2 days away. That afternoon, a knock at the door nearly made me jump out of my skin. It was Sheriff Tanner, his face grim. "There's been another disappearance," he said. "Hiker up near Ravens Point. You seen anything unusual?" I thought about the stone circle, the footprints, the drawing. "No," I lied. "Nothing." He nodded, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Your grandpa," he said slowly, "he ever talked to you about the woods? About what happened to your mother?" Before I could answer, a distant scream echoed through the trees. Sheriff's hand went to his holster. "Get inside," he ordered. "Lock the door." That night, the sounds from the woods were louder than ever. Screams, howls, and underneath it all, that constant thrumming. I sat by the window, watching the tree line. Just after midnight, I saw them, pinpricks of red light moving through the forest. Eyes, they were coming closer. With trembling hands, I gathered what I needed for the ritual: a candle, a knife, a lock of my own hair. As I stepped onto the porch, the night air hit me like a wall of ice. The eyes were at the edge of the clearing now, hovering 8 feet off the ground. I ran. Branches tore at my clothes as I stumbled up the overgrown trail to Raven's Point. Behind me, I heard the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. The thrumming grew louder until it felt like my skull would split open. I burst into the stone circle, gasping for breath. The monoliths loomed around me, their carvings seeming to writhe in the moonlight. In the center, where the child's shoe had been, now stood a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its body a mass of shadows that never quite held a consistent shape. 2 glowing red eyes stared down at me from a face that wasn't a face. "Elizabeth," it said, in a voice like rustling leaves. "We've been waiting for you." I wanted to run, to scream, but my body wouldn't respond. All I could do was stare as the thing reached for me with hands that were not hands. "Your grandfather understood the bargain," it continued. "1 child every 30 years to keep the hunger at bay. Your mother was meant to be ours, but he interfered, and now the debt must be paid." With the last of my strength, I raised the knife. "I'm not a child anymore," I managed to say. The thing's eyes flared brighter. "No," it agreed. "You're the new keeper." As its shadowy form engulfed me, I saw flashes of memory, not my own but Grandpa's. The ritual, the bargain, the terrible price of keeping Hollow Creek safe. I understood then. I wasn't here to stop the ritual. I was here to continue it. When Sheriff Tanner found me the next morning, I was sitting calmly in the center of the stone circle. I told him about the missing hiker, where to find the body, how to explain the disappearance. He nodded, relief and something like respect in his eyes. "Your grandpa taught you well," he said. As he turned to leave, I called out, "Sheriff? There's a new family that moved in last month, the Millers. They have a young daughter, don't they?" He paused, then nodded slowly. "They do. Cute kid? Sarah, I think her name is." I smiled. "Sarah? That's a lovely name." The woods whispered around us, and somewhere in the shadows, red eyes watched and waited. The whispering well. I've always been drawn to the stories that linger in the shadows of small towns. The tales whispered over pints in dimly lit pubs, or passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. That's why I came to Thornhaven, a village nestled at the edge of an ancient forest that seemed to swallow the horizon. My name is Evelyn Marsh, and I'm a folklorist, or at least that's what I tell people. It sounds more respectable than ghost hunter or mystery chaser. But the truth is, I'm drawn to the unexplained, the stories that make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Thornhaven had called to me for years. Mentions of it cropped up in obscure folklore texts, always in relation to a well hidden deep in the forest. A well said to reach the underworld itself. I dismissed it as just another local legend, until I stumbled across a century-old newspaper clipping about a rash of missing children in the area. The connection was too tempting to ignore. I arrived in Thornhaven on a gray autumn day, the kind where the sky seems to press down on you. The village was a collection of stone cottages and weathered timber buildings that looked like they'd grown out of the landscape itself. As I made my way to the local inn, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The innkeeper, a grizzled man named Tom, eyed me suspiciously as I checked in. "What brings you to Thornhaven, miss?" he asked, his voice gravely from years of smoke and whiskey. "Research," I replied, offering my most disarming smile. "I'm studying local folklore." His eyes narrowed. "Best stick to the village, then. The forest isn't kind to outsiders." I nodded, but we both knew I had no intention of heeding his warning. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind howling through the eaves. It carried whispers, snippets of conversation just beyond comprehension. I told myself it was just the wind, but a part of me knew better. The next morning, I set out to explore the village. The locals were polite but distant. their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. Children played in the streets, but their laughter seemed muted, as if they were afraid to draw attention to themselves. It was in the village square that I first heard direct mention of the well. Two old women, their faces lined with years of worry, spoke in hushed tones. "Another one gone," one whispered. "Little Mary's shoe found by the well." "Hush," the other warned, noticing me. "We don't speak of such things." I approached them, my heart racing. "Excuse me," I said. I couldn't help overhearing. "What well are you talking about?" They exchanged a look of fear and something else. Resignation, perhaps. The older of the two spoke, her voice trembling. "The Whispering Well, deep in the forest. It's been there since before the village, before time itself, some say. It takes the children." "Martha," the other woman hissed. "Don't tell her such things." But Martha continued, her eyes distant. "Every few years it calls. A child vanishes. We find a shoe by the well, perfectly preserved, no matter how long it's been there." I pressed for more information, but they clammed up, hurrying away as if I carried some contagion. The rest of the day yielded little more. The villagers were clearly terrified of the well, but none would speak of it directly. As night fell, I knew what I had to do. I packed a bag with supplies, flashlight, rope, first aid kit, and slipped out of the inn. The forest loomed before me, a wall of darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. I'd like to say I strode in bravely, but the truth is, I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But the mystery of the well, and the fate of those children, pulled me forward. The forest was unlike any I'd ever encountered. The trees grew close together, their branches intertwining overhead to block out what little moonlight there was. My flashlight beam seemed feeble against the pressing darkness. The ground was soft underfoot, every step accompanied by the unsettling squelch of rotting vegetation. And always, there were the whispers. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a cacophony of voices speaking in languages I couldn't understand. I caught snippets that sounded like names, pleas for help, terrible secrets. I don't know how long I walked. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that place. But eventually, I emerged into a clearing. And there it was, the Whispering Well. It was a simple structure, just a ring of stones surrounding a black maw that seemed to devour light. A rusted iron bucket hung from a wooden crossbeam, swaying gently despite the lack of wind. And there, perched on the well's edge, was a child's shoe. Small, made of brown leather, perfectly preserved, as if it had been placed there moments ago. My hand trembled as I reached for the shoe. The moment my fingers touched the leather, the whispers exploded into screams. Thousands of voices cried out in terror and anguish, the sound seeming to come from the depths of the well itself. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The screams faded, leaving only the soft creaking of the bucket's chain. Against my better judgment, I approached the well again. I knew I shouldn't look down, knew that whatever was at the bottom of that well was not meant for mortal eyes. But I couldn't resist. I leaned over the edge, shining my flashlight into the depths. The beam seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, revealing nothing. But as I stared, I began to see something. Movement in the shadows, shapes that defied description. And faces, hundreds of faces pressed against what looked like a membrane at the bottom of the well, their mouths open in silent screams. I recognized some of those faces from missing persons reports I'd studied. Children lost over decades, their features untouched by time. But there were older faces too, adults with hollow eyes and anguished expressions. A tendril of darkness reached up from the depths, moving with terrible purpose. I tried to pull back, but found myself frozen in place. The tendril brushed against my cheek, cold as the grave, and I heard a voice, not in my ears, but inside my mind. "You've come," it said, its tone a mixture of hunger and satisfaction. "We've been waiting for you, Evelyn." How did it know my name? The question barely had time to form before images flooded my mind. I saw the history of the well, stretching back millennia. It had always been here, a tear in the fabric of reality, a gateway to somewhere else, a place of endless hunger. The village had grown up around it, its people bound to the well by ancient pacts. Every few years, it demanded a sacrifice, a child, pure and full of potential. The village complied, for the alternative was too terrible to contemplate. But the well's hunger was growing. Children were no longer enough. It wanted more. It wanted me. With a supreme effort of will, I tore myself away from the well's edge. The tendril of darkness followed, reaching for me. I scrambled backwards, my feet slipping on the damp ground. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, urging me to give in, to let go, to join them in the depths. My back hit a tree, and I felt something in my pocket. The child's shoe. Without thinking, I hurled it into the well. There was a moment of absolute silence, then a roar that shook the very ground. The well erupted, tendrils of darkness shooting into the sky. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. Behind me, I could hear something pursuing. Many somethings, their movements accompanied by the sound of cracking wood and inhuman shrieks. I burst out of the forest, not stopping until I reached the village square. As I turned, gasping for breath, I saw the trees at the forest's edge writhing, as if in pain. But whatever had been chasing me seemed unable to leave the woods. The commotion had woken the villagers. They emerged from their homes, eyes wide with fear as they took in my disheveled appearance and the unnatural movement of the trees. "You've angered it," Tom the innkeeper said, his face ashen. "God help us all." The next few days were a blur. The village elders convened, arguing in hushed tones about what to do. Some wanted to offer me to the well, to appease its anger. Others argued for abandoning the village entirely. In the end, it was Martha, the old woman from the square, who proposed a solution. "We've been feeding it for too long," she said, her voice strong despite her years. "It's time we fought back." And so, under a moonless sky, the entire village gathered at the edge of the forest. Led by Martha, they began to chant in a language I didn't recognize. The air grew thick with power, and I watched in awe as a barrier of light formed, separating the village from the forest. "It won't hold forever," Martha told me later, "but it will give us time. Time to find a way to close the well for good." I knew then that I couldn't leave. Whatever I had stirred up in that well, I was a part of it now. The mystery I had come to solve had become something far larger, far more dangerous. As I write this, I can still hear the whispers on the wind. They're quieter now, but filled with a terrible promise. The well is waiting, hungry and patient. And I fear that one day, no matter what we do, it will find a way to break free. But for now, we stand guard. The village has become a bastion against an evil older than time itself. And I, Evelyn Marsh, once a simple folklorist, find myself at the center of a battle for the very soul of this place. The Whispering Well may have called me here, but I choose to stay. For the sake of those children lost in its depths, for the village that has suffered for so long, and for all those who might fall prey to its hunger if we fail. The whispers continue, but now they have an answer. We will not give in, we will not look away, and somehow someday we will silence the Whispering Well forever. The Whispers of Stone. I've always known our family was different. The way my grandmother would mutter to herself while tending the garden, how my father's eyes would dart nervously to the old standing stones whenever we passed them on the tractor. But it wasn't until the night of the blood moon that I truly understood the weight of our legacy. My name is Emily Blackwood, and I'm the last of my line. At least, I think I am. It's hard to be sure of anything anymore. It started with the harvest. We'd had bad years before. Droughts, floods, pests, but nothing like this. The corn withered on the stalk, the wheat rotted in the fields, and the apples fell from the trees, rotten to the core. At first, we blamed it on some new blight or disease. Dad called in experts from the agricultural college, but they were baffled. All the tests came back normal. There was no logical reason for our crops to fail so spectacularly. That's when the whispers started. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the dying cornfields. But late at night, when the house was quiet and the moon hung low and red in the sky, I could hear them clearly. Voices, ancient and insistent, speaking in a language I didn't understand but somehow knew in my bones. They came from the standing stones. There are 5 of them, arranged in a rough circle on the hill overlooking our farm. They've been there as long as anyone can remember, weathered and covered in strange symbols no one's ever been able to decipher. As kids, we used to dare each other to spend the night up there, but no one ever did. There was something about those stones that made your skin crawl, like they were watching you. Now, as I stood at my bedroom window, staring at their silhouettes against the blood-red moon, I knew they were more than just rocks. They were alive, in their own way, and they were hungry. The next morning, I tried to talk to Dad about it. He was in the barn, tinkering with the tractor, even though there was nothing left to harvest. "Dad," I said, "I think there's something wrong with the stones." He froze, his back to me. When he turned, his face was pale. "What do you mean, Emily?" I told him about the whispers, about the feeling of dread that had settled over me like a shroud. He listened silently, his eyes growing more haunted with each word. When I finished, he sank onto a hay bale, his head in his hands. "I hoped it wouldn't come to this," he murmured. "Not in your lifetime." "What wouldn't come to this?" I demanded. "Dad, what's going on?" He looked up at me, and in that moment he seemed to age a decade. "It's time you knew the truth, Emily. About our family, about this land, and about the bargain." Over the next hour, he told me a story that seemed impossible, yet explained so much. Centuries ago, our ancestors had come to this land, desperate and starving. The soil was poor, the winters harsh. They were on the brink of giving up when they discovered the stones. They were different then, Dad said, glowing with an inner light, humming with power, and they offered a deal. The stones, or rather the entity that spoke through them, promised prosperity. Bountiful harvests, healthy livestock, protection from disease and disaster. All it asked in return was a simple ritual to be performed every 100 years under a blood moon. "What kind of ritual?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Dad's voice was barely a whisper. "A sacrifice." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with centuries of guilt and secrets. "For generations, our family has been the caretaker of this land," Dad continued. "We've reaped the benefits of that ancient bargain, but we've also borne the burden of upholding it." I felt sick. And now? Now the 100 years are up, the blood moon is coming, and the land is calling in its debt. As if to punctuate his words, a scream echoed from outside. We rushed out to find our neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, hysterical in our yard. Her son, Tommy, had vanished. One minute he was playing in their backyard, the next, gone without a trace. Over the next few days, more children disappeared. The town was in an uproar, search parties combing every inch of the countryside. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that they wouldn't be found, not until it was too late. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I could hear them even in broad daylight now, a constant susurration at the edge of my consciousness. And I wasn't the only one affected. People in town reported hearing strange noises, seeing shadows move where there should be none. Pets went missing, electronics malfunctioned, and a pervasive sense of dread settled over the community like a fog. But the worst was yet to come. It was a week before the blood moon when I first noticed the change in my reflection. I was brushing my teeth, half asleep and barely paying attention, when something in the mirror caught my eye. For a split second, the face looking back at me wasn't my own. It was older, wilder, with eyes that glowed with an inner fire and skin etched with those same undecipherable symbols from the stones. I blinked, and my normal reflection returned. But I knew what I'd seen. The land wasn't just calling for a sacrifice, it was calling for a vessel. I confronted Dad about it, but he seemed unsurprised. "It's always been this way," he said wearily. "The chosen one bears the mark. It's how the land ensures the ritual is performed." "And if it isn't?" I asked. His silence was answer enough. As the days ticked down to the blood moon, the situation grew dire. Crops across the county withered and died. Livestock fell ill. The missing children count rose to 5, then 10. The old well in our backyard, dry for as long as I could remember, began to overflow with a dark, viscous liquid that smelled of rotten copper. I knew it had to be done. The thought of it made me sick. But the alternative, the complete destruction of everything and everyone I'd ever known, was unthinkable. The night of the blood moon, I slipped out of the house while my parents slept. I could feel the stones calling to me, their whispers a siren song I couldn't resist. As I climbed the hill, the air grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin tingle. The stones loomed before me, their surfaces glowing with a dull red light that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. And there, in the center of the circle, were the missing children. They stood silently, eyes vacant, swaying slightly as if to some unheard rhythm. I stepped into the circle, and the whispers rose to a crescendo. The symbols on the stones began to writhe and shift, forming words I could suddenly understand. "The bargain must be upheld," they said. "Blood for blood, life for life. Are you willing to pay the price?" I thought of my family, of our town, of the generations that had lived and thrived on this land. I thought of the children, innocent victims of a pact made long before their time. And I made my choice. "I am," I said. The stones flared brightly, and I felt something ancient and powerful surge through me. My skin burned as the symbols etched themselves into my flesh. I could feel the land itself, alive and aware, its consciousness merging with my own. I understood then, with perfect clarity, what needed to be done. Not a sacrifice of innocence, but a willing offering. A guardian to watch over the land, to maintain the balance between the human world and the otherworldly forces that shaped it. As the blood moon reached its zenith, I placed my hands on the central stone. Energy crackled between us, and I felt myself being drawn in, becoming one with the earth and stone and sky. The children stirred, blinking as if waking from a deep sleep. They looked around in confusion, then began to make their way down the hill, drawn by some instinct toward home and safety. As for me, I remain. Part of me is still Emily Blackwood, but I am also something more now. I am the land itself, its guardian, and its voice. I watch over the farms and forests, ensuring the balance is maintained. The harvests are bountiful once more, and the town prospers. Sometimes, on nights when the moon is full and red, people say they can see a figure standing among the stones on the hill. They say she looks both young and ancient, with eyes that glow like embers and skin marked with strange shifting symbols. They're right, of course. I am here, and I will always be here, for as long as the land endures. The whispers of the stones are my whispers now, and the secrets of the wind are mine to keep. This is my story, my legacy, my eternal vigil. I am the last of the Blackwoods and the first of something new. And though the price was high, I do not regret my choice. For in saving my people, I found my true purpose. In the end, isn't that what we all seek? A place to belong, a purpose to fulfill, a legacy to leave behind. Mine just happens to be etched in stone, whispered on the wind, and bound to this land for all eternity.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.